Rath and Storm. Edited by Peter Archer. Magic: The Gathering. Anthology. A dark room. The room was long and dark, lit only by a single guttering candle. The bookcases that lined the stone walls, each loaded with leather-bound tomes, seemed to lean inward, menacing the slender figure who knelt by an open chest. Wild white hair straggled across his face, and from time to time he brushed it impatiently away. His eyes flickered uneasily about the room, especially toward the high-vaulted window covered by heavy drapes. Through a gap in the curtains there flashed intermittently a harsh, ghastly light. Muffled boom of thunder rumbled through the room, and a few books tumbled from the shelves. The white-haired man, surrounded by packets of papers, started and half rose. Then, shrugging his shoulders, he returned to his documents. So preoccupied was he that he took no notice of a small wooden door at the far end of the chamber swung open, and a boy entered. Slight of figure with slender wrists, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, he was clad in the brown robes of a student. Softly he advanced until he was directly behind the man. "Master?"
Off!
The older man startled again, scattering papers and nearly upsetting the candle.
Don't do that, boy. Are you insane? You could be killed sneaking about like that.
He paused in his tirade to consider the boy more closely.
What are you still doing here? Anyway, you should be in bed.
The boy shook his head, tears starting in his eyes.
"Don't be angry with me, Master. I was frightened by the storm and I saw a light in here. One of the other masters was telling us of a fire started by lightning that burned down a great library, and I was worried. I couldn't bear for all of this to be lost."
His voice trailed off as he hung his head, sobbing openly.
Nonsense. The storm, just thunder and lightning. Nothing will hurt anyone.
The master's voice softened.
What's your name?
"Ilcaster, sir."
Well, Ilcaster, take it from me that this library will still exist long after you and I are gone. It can outlast any storm.
"But how, Master?"
The boy gazed disconsolately around the room, most of it sunk in shadow.
"Books don't last forever."
The master's hand lightly slapped his pupil.
Books, he said contemptuously. Books are not the soul of the library.
"But, Master, it's written elsewhere that a library without books is like a castle without walls, a monastery without monks,
The true library,"
interrupted the old man, tapping his forehead,
"is up here."
What do you mean, Master?"
I mean, foolish boy, that what matters are the memories in our heads, not smudges of ink on paper.
Ilcaster wrinkled his brow.
"I think I understand, Master, but then why preserve books at all, and why are you bothering with these?"
His outstretched hands indicated the papers lying about them. The older man grunted and bent again to his task.
Because, although the library is the sum of memories, we need reminding occasionally that these papers are perishable. Never forget that, lad. Now, as long as you're here, help me sort these. This part of the archives hasn't been touched in decades, and I want to clean it up.
The two figures bent over the documents, their shadows stretching over the floor to meld with the deeper darkness beneath the library walls. To Ilcaster, it seemed as if the flashes of light were growing more frequent, and the deep-throated rumbles were louder than before.
"What's this?"
The white-haired man glanced over the boy's shoulder.
A flying ship. See? Down there, that's her name.
"Weatherlight? It's a pretty name."
A fine name for a fine ship. But it's quite well known. Didn't you read about her in early Dominarian legends?
The boy hung his head, and even in the dim light, the master could see he was blushing.
For shame! The story of the Weatherlight is one of the great epic stories of the age.
"Well, I've never heard it, anyway," observed the boy. "And I never heard of a sailing ship that could fly. Flying is for ornithopters."
Well then. Naturally you know all about it.
The old man returned grumpily to his papers. Ilcaster saw he'd gone too far.
"I beg your pardon, Master. I didn't mean to disbelieve you. Weatherlight, no, I've never heard of her. Who was her captain?"
Gerrard Capuchin. Though how he came to be captain.
The old man's voice trailed off, and he glanced up at the gloom that surrounded them.
"Go on, Master. What happened to him?"
The master sighed and spread his hand in resignation.
Very well. This was many years ago, but still thousands of years after the Brothers' War. You've heard of that, I suppose? In Argive reckoning, the date of the Rath cycle would be 4205, but the story actually begins some 26 years previous to that. Gerrard was an orphan living in Jamura. He had been given into the care of a war clan by his parents before their death and raised by the Sidar Kondo along with his own son, Vul.
Sidar Kondo? Who's that?
The leader of the war clan.
Why did Gerard's parents abandon him?
They did not abandon him. They gave him over to the war clan for his own safety.
Why? Who was threatening him?
Well, as Gerrard grew older, he heard stories of a mysterious figure called the Lord of the Wastes. Some members of the war clan even claimed to have seen this strange figure. They said he was tall, with burning eyes, surrounded by a halo of flame that destroyed everything it touched.
Ilcaster nodded. Yes. Master, I think I've heard of those stories, so that's who was threatening Gerard's life?
No, of course not. The stories were so much superstitious nonsense. Halo of flame indeed.
The old man's eyes grew dim, as if he were looking deep inside himself, drawing forth memories that had not been recalled in a very, very long time.
No. The real enemy was someone much worse.
Who could be worse than someone who burns everything he touches, or someone named the Lord of the Wastes? The old man scowled.
I'll tell you, and if you're quiet and listen, for a moment, it's suffice to say that Gerrard grew up knowing his parents were dead, murdered by some mysterious force whose true name he did not know. Gerrard was brought to the clan by a silver golem named Karn, a bequest from his parents. The golem was a marvelous machine that you might almost mistake for a living being. But even more marvelous, the golem carried within it a collection of magical artifacts known as the Legacy.
The old man turned over a paper.
I had a list here somewhere,
He murmured.
list of the items that were part of the Legacy. Well, no matter. Here, boy, sort through this pile and separate all the documents, headed in red. You can do that while I talk. The Legacy had also been bequeathed to Gerrard by his parents. The origin of this collection were unknown to Gerrard, or indeed to Karn himself. Nonetheless, the golem knew the collection was of supreme importance and that both Gerrard and the Legacy must be closely guarded until some far-off day of destiny. Gerrard and Vul, the Sidar's son, were close as blood brothers. They played together, learned together, and together they sampled all the pleasures and pains of growing boys. But as they neared manhood, Vul grew jealous of Gerrard, an envy egged on by a mysterious fellow named Stark.
Another mystery,
Said the boy, drawn in by the story.
Who was this Stark?
None knew at the time. He appeared from out of the desert and sought refuge with the war clan. First he spoke softly and gently, but some noticed that he spent much of his time watching the two boys. Some thought that the time went on that Stark seemed to look with a special intensity at Vul, as if he had some great future plan for the young man. And always he whispered in Vul's ear, though what the young man heard from Stark he kept hidden from all, including both his father and Gerrard. Others might have resisted Stark's blandishments, but Vul was jealous, quick to anger, sensitive to slights. Stark persuaded the foolish Vul, who was also arrogant as only young men can be, that Gerrard intended to steal his birthright.
But Gerrard was innocent, interrupted Ilcaster. The old man, in the full flow of his narrative, swung round and glared at the student, who blushed and pretended to study carefully an illustration, the manuscript before him.
Yes,
Conceded the librarian.
Gerrard was innocent of the intentions Stark attributed to him. But Vul believed the whisperings of the mysterious man. In all Gerrard's actions, he saw only plots against his rightful place in the clan.
The master paused, and Ilcaster, after a moment, said,
Perhaps Stark was working for the Lord of the Wastes, or rather, he added hastily, for the force that had killed Gerard's parents.
The librarian nodded grudgingly.
That's an interesting guess. Whatever the case, Stark succeeded in turning Vul against Gerrard and against his own father. His plot culminated during Vul's rite of passage.
Ilcaster nodded.
I heard of those. They're used in some societies to show passage to adulthood. What was this one for?
Yes, it was a ritual to which every Sidar's son was subject. To succeed his father in the leadership of the clan, Vul had to pass this test. Stark knew this and manipulated matters so that Vul's life was threatened during the ritual. Stark also knew that Gerrard could not bear to see his friend in danger and would rescue him.
The old man sighed.
Gerrard performed just as Stark had expected, and Vul was saved from death. But since he had disrupted the ritual, Vul angrily accused his stepbrother of destroying his chance to become warlord. Vul brooded on the insult until finally, at Stark's urging, he decided to steal the most precious thing Gerrard possessed, the legacy. Karn became aware of this plot, though too late to prevent it. One night when the clan slept, Vul rose from his bed, gathered the pieces of the legacy together, and carried them away with him.
Ilcaster looked puzzled.
But how could he steal them so easily? He asked. Wasn't Karn guarding them?
Well, he should have been, but the golem was deceived by Vul, like both Gerrard and the Sidar. Karn was aware of the theft almost immediately and gave chase to the treacherous young man. His journey was long. The golem could not travel nearly as fast as the Sidar's son, and he lost the trail many times, but at last he traced Vul to a remote village, and there he demanded the return of the legacy.
And did Vul fight? I wouldn't have thought he had much chance against a golem.
Ilcaster asked, his tone skeptical.
No, in ordinary circumstances, Karn could probably have defeated Vul easily, but the young man tricked the silver golem. During their fight, Karn was responsible for the death of an innocent bystander. Horrified, he stopped the fight, swearing that he'd battle no more lest others be hurt. In that moment of weakness, Vul used a piece of the legacy called the touchstone to deactivate the golem.
Ilcaster wrinkled his brow.
Used it? Did he use the magical power within it to destroy the golem?
No. He brought it close to Karn, where its power turned off the machine that was the golem. But just before his consciousness faded, Karn reached out and clutched the touchstone, pulling it away from Vul. All the latter's efforts were insufficient to pry it loose again, and Vul was forced to flee the village, whose inhabitants had turned against him. In fact, the villagers believed Karn had liberated them from Vul, and as a reward, they placed the immobile statue of the golem in the village square, where it remained for years.
Ilcaster laughed delightedly, and the unexpected sound seemed to momentarily push back the gathering shadows in the room.
A statue? That's wonderful. But what happened to the legacy?
But Vul took it with him and scattered it piece by piece throughout the lands in which he traveled. Gerrard was left with only a single item of the legacy, a necklace with an hourglass pendant. See, here's a sketch of it. It's beautiful. Yes, but that was all Gerrard retained of his birthright. Meanwhile, Vul, having scattered the legacy far and wide, launched a war against his father.
There's another rumble of thunder. Rain rattled against the windows. The librarian moved to one wall and checked the fastenings on the panes before resuming his story.
Gerrard left the war clan. He didn't know what happened to Karn, his guardian from boyhood. Perhaps he felt abandoned, having lost both Karn and Vul. In any event, he took up magical training under the tutelage of a Morrow sorcerer named Multani. There, in the caves where Multani lived, Gerrard met Miri, a cat warrior, and Raphelos, a Llanowar elf. For many years, they were his closest friends.
I don't understand, interrupted Ilcaster. Why did Vul still hate Gerrard so much?
The librarian steepled his fingers.
He'd become obsessed. Some might say he was mad. He was determined to blot out Gerrard and all who were near him. Vul, in his envious rage, pursued Gerrard. Multani learned of the threat in time and sent Gerrard, Miri, and Raphelos away from the cave. When they returned some time later, they found the cave in ruins and Multani gone. Dead?
Ilcaster's eyes were wide. The master shook his head.
Not know for sure. Certainly the three companions did not know, but worse was to come. They returned to the war clan's encampment, the site of Gerrard's youth. They again found a scene of ruin and slaughter. The warlords, Gerrard's adoptive father, was dead, and Gerrard's last tie to his past was broken. Now, Gerrard knew this must be the work of Vool. 3 companions left the cave and tried to make the best lives for themselves that they could, traveling the land as hired fighters. At last, during their travels, Gerrard, Miri, and Raphaelos met Sisay, a Jamuran native and captain of the Weatherlight.
Sisay? I thought you said Gerrard was the captain. A frown on the old man silenced the boy's eager outburst. I'm sorry, Master. The boy subsided and huddled close to the old man's feet, his eager face turned upward.
Sisay was able to persuade Gerrard to join her. In point of fact, she won a bet against him. Payment was to join her crew.
What was the wager? The scholar snorted contemptuously.
It was thoroughly foolish. Apparently, the 3 companions were throwing knives at a low tavern of some sort. Sisay watched them for a time. They challenged Gerrard to a contest of skill. He accepted confidently and rejoiced when his knife struck the very center of the target. But Sisay, whose warrior skills had been honed by long years of training, split the haft of his knife with her own cast. Gerrard was humiliated before his friends, and sullenly he agreed to fulfill his part of the bet and enlist with her. Once he and the others were aboard, she revealed to him that she'd been searching for the pieces of the legacy ever since Vool scattered them. She asked for Gerrard's help, and he reluctantly agreed to give it.
Ilcaster's brow was wrinkled. I must be missing a piece of this puzzle, he said. Why was Sisay searching for the legacy? What did it have to do with her? The librarian nodded.
Well, you should ask that. In fact, Sisay herself had a mysterious birthright. Like Gerrard, she was an orphan. Her parents, too, had died under strange circumstances. Before they died, they told her stories of the Lord of the Wastes.
But you just earlier said it was just a...
I know I did. Be silent, boy. It's true that the Lord of the Wastes is mythological, conceded the librarian. Had they lived longer, I think Sisay's parents might have told her that. But they died too soon. Sisay did not know the entire truth. In any case, her parents warned her that the only force that had the power to defeat the Lord of the Wastes was the legacy. They passed to her their most precious possession, Weatherlight, and charged her to go forth and seek out the scattered pieces of the legacy. Sadly, during one of her many journeys on the ship, her parents died. But meanwhile, Sisay had accumulated many of bits of legacy and stowed them on board the ship. This, at any rate, was as much of her history as Sisay told to Gerrard and his companions. Gerrard sensed that there was more, but she was not willing to reveal it to him. Weatherlight's crew included a good many strange creatures whom Sisay had picked up in the course of her adventures. Tangarth, a Talurum Minotaur, his first mate. The navigator was Hannah, an Argivian artificer. Then there was Orum, a Samite healer, Krovax, a nobleman, and Squee, the goblin cabin boy. Of course, there were many more, but these are the figures who play particular roles in our story. Gerrard, Raphaelos, and Miri joined this band. They searched for some time before an urgent message drew them back to Krovax's home in Urbor. It seemed his estate was under attack by strange creatures from a plane called Rath.
Rath! The boy bounced excitedly. Master, that's the very word written on top of this paper. The Rath cycle.
Of course it's the Rath cycle. Isn't that what I just told you?
No, Master, you said...
All right. Never mind that.
The old man rose and stomped about the room, his feet beating out an indignant rhythm on the stone floor.
Just be quiet and listen. Weatherlight arrived just in time to turn back an attack by these creatures, Gallowbraid and Morven, their names were. But during the fight, Gallowbraid slew Raphaelos the elf. As Raphaelos lay dying in Gerrard's arms, Krovax drew on the power of a cursed artifact that had belonged to his family for generations and summoned Selenia, a guardian angel in the service of Krovax's family. With her help, Weatherlight's crew beat back the attack, but when the battle was over, Sisay and Gerrard quarreled. Gerrard wanted to abandon the search for the legacy, a quest he blamed for the death of his friend Raphaelos. And nothing Sisay said to him could change his mind. Taking the hourglass pendant and Miri with him, Gerrard left Weatherlight.
Left? Boy almost shouted. But you told me he became captain.
So I did, and so he did. The story doesn't end here. Are you finished sorting that stack of papers? Good.
The old man tied the bundle with a string and thrust it into a cabinet.
Now, do the same for these 2 stacks.
The boy began gathering scattered packets, stacking them neatly by the old man's feet, then paging through them. The master, glancing around the room as if to assure himself they were still alone, went on with his tale.
Undoubtedly, there was much bitterness on both sides in the quarrel. To Sisay, it appeared that Gerrard was simply abandoning his destiny in favor of his own selfish interests. And to Gerrard, it seemed Sisay put some abstract commitment to the legacy of the lives of those nearest and dearest to her. Other crew members were affected by the quarrel as well. Over the years he served on the Weatherlight, Gerrard had grown close to Hannah, the navigator, who probably knew more than anyone about the ship. Her feelings were strong indeed, but she hesitated to speak them aloud to Gerrard. When he left, she felt hurt, betrayed. Tangarth, on the other hand, seemed almost pleased to see Gerrard leave, as if the young man was confirming some estimate the Minotaur had formed of his character. At any rate, Gerrard and Miri left, and the ship sailed on. While Sisay and the rest of the Weatherlight crew were continuing their journey in search of the legacy, Gerrard traveled to Dominaria, where he joined the Banalish infantry and became a master-at-arms. Miri returned to Llanowar to inform Raphaelos' kin of the elf's death, and so the 2 friends parted. Meanwhile, Sisay had discovered a key part of the legacy, an artifact called the Thran Tome. From this magical book, she learned 2 things of tremendous importance. First, the tome told her that Weatherlight, itself a part of the legacy, could actually move between different planes of existence. This ability to plane shift was made possible by the crystal that powered the ship's engines. The tome also told Sisay of a plane called Rath, the very place from which Gallowbraid and Mournfen had come to attack Krovax's estate. The tome's entries were not entirely clear. Sisay concluded from them that Rath had some great importance for the future of Dominaria. Sisay also recovered Karn from the village where Vul had hidden him, and the Silver Golem became a valued part of the Weatherlight's cargo of artifacts. Along with Karn, of course, she also found the touchstone still clutched irretrievably in the Golem's grasp. And then Sisay stumbled onto a piece of terrifying information. Vul, the Sidar's son, Gerard's deadliest enemy, had left the plane of Dominaria for Rath. In that dark place, he had become the ruler and had changed his name, Volrath. He brooded there in his great fortress, stronghold, planning Gerard's destruction. All this Sisay learned from a native of Rath, Stark.
Wait a moment, the boy interrupted. Wasn't Stark the same one?
That's right, Stark, the same man who had corrupted Vul.
But why would Stark help Sisay?
Because, although he'd helped Volrath to become the ruler of Rath, he was horrified when he realized for whom Rath had been constructed, who its rulers truly served.
Who? The boy's voice sank to a whisper as if he feared the answer.
Phyrexia.
The old man's voice trembled, as if in the answer the light flashed outside and the walls of the library shivered. The old man cleared his throat, continued his story.
Stark had undergone many changes over the years. Now he was trying to play both sides against one another. He tried to corrupt Krovax, playing on the love of the young nobleman felt for the angel Selenia. Krovax, who had returned to his family estate after the death of Raphaelos, freed Selenia, smashing the artifact that summoned her. He did this out of great love for her, but in doing so, he doomed both her and himself. Soon after she was freed, the angel was snatched away from Krovax through a kind of portal. The wily Stark persuaded Krovax to rejoin Weatherlight, hoping to shape Sisay's ship into a weapon with which might oppose Volrath's power. In a more personal reason of his hatred of Volrath, the ruler of Rath had taken Stark's daughter, Takara, prisoner, and held her as insurance against her father's good behavior.
The boy snorted. Would have served him right if Volrath had gotten wind of his plan.
Stark's plot was even more complicated than that. He knew that Volrath's great enemy was Gerrard. He needed a way to lure Gerrard to Rath, where the young master-at-arms could confront and destroy Volrath. So he performed one last bit of treachery.
What was that? The boy, his packets forgotten, sat open-mouthed on the floor.
Stark betrayed Sisay to Volrath. The evil ruler kidnapped her and stole the bits of the legacy she so painstakingly collected. Then Stark revealed to the crew of the Weatherlight who had kidnapped Sisay, begged them to find Gerrard, to force him to accompany them. They departed on their greatest mission, to travel to Rath and rescue Sisay.